On the mountain trail, my own son and his wife suddenly shoved my husband and me off the cliff. Broken and bleeding, I heard my husband whisper, "Don't move. Pretend to be dead." When they finally left, he leaned close and revealed a truth more terrifying than the fall itself. My world shattered just 3 days ago. My own son, Damian, and his wife, Melissa, pushed my husband Henry and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay there, broken and bleeding, Henry's desperate whisper echoed in my ears. "Hilda, don't move. Play dead." But the true horror wasn't the fall itself. It was the unspeakable secret Henry then revealed, a truth my children had buried for 25 years, a secret that changed everything, forever changing how I see my own family. For 4 decades, Henry and I believed we were building the perfect life. We'd wake up in our little suburban home, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the chirping of birds. I was a teacher, coming home every afternoon with stories of my young students. Henry, with his rough yet delicate hands, ran his carpentry shop, transforming simple wood into breathtaking art. We had 2 sons. Richard, our firstborn, was the soul of the house, always laughing, always helping his dad, always shielding me from worries. Damian, 5 years younger, was more reserved, but I loved him with the same fierce intensity. You never play favorites as a mother. Or so I thought. Sundays, after church, we'd gather around the oak table Henry carved, Richard full of dreams about engineering, Damian quietly picking at his food. Life was simple, beautiful. In the evenings, Henry and I would walk the town trail, talking about our dreams, watching our grandchildren grow, growing old together in that very house. I never imagined those peaceful walks were training for the one that almost killed me. Weekends meant family gatherings. My sisters, Harriet and Irene, would bring their kids, filling the house with laughter, women sharing recipes, men fixing things in the yard. Henry was my rock. After 40 years, he still brought me wildflowers, helped me grade papers, and I'd hold wood steady for him in his shop. We were an unbreakable team. Or so I thought. We'd sit on the porch, watching the stars, planning trips, a smaller house for retirement. But perfect happiness, as I would discover years later, can hide the deepest tragedies. When Richard turned 20, everything shifted. He and Damian started arguing, whispering in the hallway, falling silent when I appeared. Henry brushed it off as brotherly stuff, and I desperately wanted to believe him. I needed to believe my family was still perfect. Then, one night in October, exactly 25 years ago, Richard didn't come home for dinner. We waited until 11, then midnight, then 1 a.m. Damian was supposedly studying, but I saw something chilling in his eyes whenever I asked about his brother. Henry went out with neighbors, searching every inch of town. At dawn, they found Richard's body at the bottom of the river gorge. The police called it an accident. He must have stumbled in the dark. I never questioned it. I couldn't imagine the truth was far more horrifying. Richard's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the same black dress I'd worn for my mother. Damian, though? He was strangely calm, an unnerving silence for someone who'd just lost his older brother. While I cried until I had no tears left, his expression, now that I know, sends shivers down my spine. Henry never left my side, holding me up, whispering comfort I now know tasted bitter in his own mouth. After Richard's death, Damian changed. He became attentive, loving, almost as if he was trying to make up for something. He helped me with chores, went to the workshop with his father, brought me things when he saw I was sad. I thought it was his way of grieving, of filling Richard's void. How naive I was. He was building a perfect mask to hide the monster inside. Years passed. The wound never fully healed, but we learned to live with it. Damian married Melissa, a sweet girl from the next town. They seemed happy, had 2 beautiful children. I finally felt like life was giving us a second chance. Melissa called me Mom, helped with housework, and Damian, inheriting Henry's talent, ran his own carpentry business. Everything seemed perfect again. But now, lying at the bottom of this gorge, ribs broken, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, I understand all that happiness was a carefully constructed lie. The first cracks appeared 6 months ago. Henry and I, both 60, decided to update our will. We'd saved our entire lives. The house, land I inherited, bank savings, nearly $200,000 for our children and grandchildren. It was Damian who suggested the lawyer. "Mom, Dad, you're 60 now. It's important to have everything in order," he said, with a smile that now seems sinister. Melissa nodded beside him, stroking my hand with fingers that would later push me to my death. "We love you so much, and we want to make sure you're protected," she added, her voice syrupy sweet. How foolish I was to mistake those words for genuine love. Our lawyer, Albert, an older man we'd known for years, explained the options. Damian insisted on naming him and Melissa as sole heirs, arguing they'd handle equitable distribution to the grandchildren. "Besides," he said, "you're going to need us when you're older. It's better for us to have access to the resources to take care of you properly." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but Henry, always more trusting, seemed convinced. I had my doubts, remembering how Richard had always talked about taking care of us. But Richard was gone. Damian was our only surviving child. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Melissa in a pretty green dress, giving me a big hug. "Now we're officially a united family forever," she whispered. Her words sent a chill through me then, though I didn't know why. Damian shook Henry's hand, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. That night, making dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd made a terrible mistake. The following weeks were strange. Damian and Melissa started visiting more often, but it felt different. No longer just family time. They had suggestions about improving the house, investments, life insurance. "Mom, you should think about selling this big house," Melissa said, her eyes calculating as she scanned our furniture. "We could help you find a comfortable apartment." But I loved our house. Every corner held a memory, a story of 40 years. The kitchen, the workshop, the yard where our children and grandchildren played. I couldn't imagine life anywhere else. When I told them this, I saw a flicker of irritation in Damian's eyes that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, you're being irrational," he said, in a tone he'd never used with me before. "This house is too big for 2 people your age. If you fall down the stairs, we won't be able to help you in time." Melissa nodded vigorously. "Besides, the upkeep costs a fortune. It would be smarter to sell now." Henry, ever practical, started to consider their arguments. But I couldn't shake the feeling there was something more. One night, after another tense conversation, I asked Henry if he didn't think Damian's sudden interest in our finances was strange. "Hilda, he just cares about us," he replied, brushing his teeth. "Maybe we should consider his suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be." But I saw it in his eyes, a shadow of doubt he didn't want to acknowledge. Now I know Henry already had his suspicions, connecting dots I didn't even know existed. Things escalated when Damian suggested power of attorney over our finances. "It's just for precaution," he explained, as Melissa prepared tea in our kitchen, as if she owned the place. "If one of you gets sick, we can manage your affairs without legal complications." He said it so naturally, so logically, it almost convinced me. But his insistence made me nervous. I couldn't sleep that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to Henry's breathing, trying to understand my unease. The next day, I called Harriet, my sister, who's always been sharper, more suspicious. When I told her about Damian's pressure, she was silent for a long moment. "Hilda," she finally said, "doesn't it seem strange that Damian is so anxious to control your money? He has his own business, he's doing well. Why would he need so much control?" Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Damian had never had financial problems, never borrowed money, never shown any need for our help. That afternoon, when Damian came for another talk about our future, I confronted him directly. "Son," I said, as we sat in the living room, "why is it so important for you to have control over our financial affairs? Your father and I are still in our right minds." His reaction was immediate and telling. His face hardened. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of someone else. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "Mom, it's not about control," he responded, his voice tense. "It's about love, care, and family responsibility." But the way he said family responsibility sounded more like a threat. Melissa, silent until then, intervened. Hilda, we just want what's best for you. It's painful to see you worry about things we could easily handle. That night, after they left, Henry and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was paranoid. I insisted something wasn't right, that Damian's behavior had changed too much. Henry, I said, as we washed dishes, do you remember Damian before Richard died? He was different, more distant, more. I don't know how to explain it. But there was something about him that scared me. Henry stopped washing the plate, looking at me intently. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, recognition. Hilda, he said, in a very low voice, there are things about Richard's death that I never told you. My heart began to pound so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. Henry's words hit me like lightning. What about Richard's death? I asked, my voice trembling. Henry sat heavily in a kitchen chair, at the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where Richard had done his homework, and where Damian had always remained silent. Henry ran his hands over his face, as if trying to erase 25 years of torment. The night Richard died, he began, his voice broken. Damian wasn't in his room studying like he told us. I saw him leave the house around 8 p.m. I followed him because something about his attitude worried me. He'd been very strange those days, more aggressive, more resentful. Henry paused, looking at his hands, as if the terrible truth he'd kept for so long was written on them. I saw them arguing by the gorge, Hilda. I heard them screaming horrible things at each other. My world began to spin. What were they arguing about? I whispered, though a part of me no longer wanted to know. Henry looked up, tears in his eyes, tears he hadn't shed at our oldest son's funeral. About the inheritance, Hilda. Damian was furious because Richard was the oldest. Because, according to family traditions, he would inherit most of our assets. But there was something more, something about money Richard had found. What money? I asked, feeling the ground vanish beneath my feet. Henry sighed deeply. 3 days before he died, Richard came to talk to me in the workshop. He had discovered that Damian had been stealing money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. Richard had proof. He'd been investigating for months. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. My youngest son, the attentive one, the one who helped and cared for us, had been stealing from us since before his brother died. Why didn't you ever tell me? I accused Henry, feeling the betrayal multiply twofold. Because when I got to the gorge that night, it was already too late, he replied, his voice choked. I saw Damian standing next to Richard's body. Our youngest son was trembling, crying, repeating over and over, "It was an accident. It was an accident." He looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help him. "Dad," he said, "Richard tripped when he was trying to hit me. I just defended myself, and he lost his balance." Tears ran down my cheeks uncontrollably. "But you believed him," I murmured, even though I already knew the answer. Henry nodded slowly, an expression of guilt that had gnawed him for decades. He was my son, Hilda. My youngest son was asking for my help, and Richard was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by destroying the other. I thought it was really an accident, that Damian had learned his lesson, that he would become a better man after this. And the stolen money? I asked, needing every detail of this nightmare. Damian promised he would pay it back little by little, that he had taken the money to invest in a business that had gone wrong. He swore he would never do something like that again. And I believed him, Hilda, God forgive me. But I believed him because I needed to believe my son wasn't a killer. I got up from the table, stumbling, holding onto the wall. Everything I had believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 25 years of my life, was a lie. Did he pay the money back? I asked, already knowing the answer from Henry's face. Never, he replied. In fact, he kept stealing small amounts that I pretended not to notice, because confronting him would mean admitting I had covered up a murder. I became his accomplice, Hilda. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to see the bank accounts dwindle, I became more of his accomplice. The horrible reality began to take shape in my mind. "That's why he's so interested in controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because he cares about us. It's because he wants to finish what he started 25 years ago. Henry nodded gravely. And there's something else, Hilda. Something I just discovered a few weeks ago. What else could there be? I asked, feeling like my heart couldn't take any more revelations. Henry went to his desk and pulled out some papers. I've been discreetly investigating Damian's finances. His carpentry business isn't doing as well as he wants us to believe. In fact, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $100,000 to several banks and suppliers. The papers trembled in my hands as I read the numbers. Damian wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure, living on lies and stolen money for decades. Does Melissa know all this? I asked, remembering her sweet smile and loving hugs. I'm sure she does, Henry replied. I've noticed how she directs the conversations when they talk about our money. How she asks specific questions about our savings, the value of the house, our life insurance policies. They aren't innocent questions, Hilda. They are questions from someone calculating exactly how much our death is worth. That sentence chilled me to the bone. Our death, I repeated, in a whisper. It was the first time I had considered that Damian might want to cause us physical harm. Until that moment, I thought he just wanted to rob or cheat us. But if he had killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason? Henry, I said, grabbing his hands. We have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Richard and about what's happening now. But my husband shook his head, a look of hopelessness breaking my heart. With what evidence, Hilda? I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to jail too. And besides, who's going to believe an old man of 65 who has been keeping the secret for 25 years? He was right. Do we just wait for him to kill us like he killed Richard? We're going to be very careful, Henry said, trying to sound more confident than he was. We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence too. But his words were interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Damian. Hi, Mom, he said, with that sweet voice that now sounded sinister. Melissa and I were thinking it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountains you've always talked about next weekend? We could go on a family hike, take pictures, and have a perfect day together. My blood turned to ice. I looked at Henry, who had heard the conversation and had the same look of terror on his face. That's a very sweet idea, son, I managed to reply, my voice trembling. But let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow. After hanging up, Henry and I looked at each other in silence, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own execution. The mountains, I murmured. He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident. Henry nodded gravely, just like he did with Richard at the gorge. That night, we didn't sleep a minute, holding each other, planning how we could save ourselves from our own son. The next few days were a nightmare of terror and pretense. Henry and I had to act as if nothing had happened when Damian and Melissa visited, smiling when they talked about the mountain trip, nodding excitedly when they spoke of spending time with family. But inside, every fiber of my being screamed with fear. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my oldest son's murderers, and now they were planning to do the same to me and my husband. Melissa arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now seemed like the grimace of a demon. Hilda, dear, she said, hugging me with those arms that would soon push me to my death. I bought some supplies for our mountain adventure. Cookies, water, fruit, everything we'll need for the picnic. She showed me the contents, like an excited child. But I could only think about how each item could cover up our murder. I also brought my new camera, she added, pulling out an expensive digital camera. I want to capture every moment of this special day. There are going to be photos we'll treasure forever. The irony made me sick. The only photo she'd take would be of our broken bodies, if anyone ever found us. Damian appeared behind her, carrying a new hiking backpack. Dad, he said to Henry with feigned enthusiasm. I bought all the necessary equipment for a safe hike. Ropes, harnesses, lanterns, a first aid kit. Every word sounded like cruel mockery. Safety equipment to plan our murders. The perversity of it made me dizzy. Isn't it a bit dangerous for people our age? I asked, trying to sound casual, looking for an excuse to cancel. Melissa stroked my cheek with that false tenderness that churned my stomach. That's why we chose a very easy and safe trail, she assured me. It's a hike even kids can do. Plus, Damian and I will be there to take care of you the whole time. Yes, they would be there to take care of us until the exact moment they decided to push us off a cliff. That night, when they finally left, Henry and I sat in our living room, trembling not just from the cold, but from the absolute terror we'd been holding back for hours. We can't go, I said, grabbing his hands. We just can't. If we don't go, Henry replied, his voice grave, they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're going to try to do. His words had a terrible logic, but they didn't comfort me. So, what do you suggest? I asked, desperate. Henry was thoughtful. We're going to go, but we're going to be prepared. I'm going to hide my cell phone and set it to record everything that happens. If we manage to survive, we'll have evidence. And if we don't, his voice broke. At least someone will know the truth. On Friday night, we could barely touch dinner. We knew it might be our last meal in our house, in that kitchen where we'd shared so many happy moments when we were a real family. Henry reviewed his will, making sure Damian wouldn't get everything without a record of our suspicions. I wrote a letter, he confessed, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. It's addressed to your sister Harriet. In it, I explain everything we know about Richard's death and what we believe Damian plans to do to us. I hid it where we keep our important documents. If we don't return from this trip, at least you'll know where to look for the truth. That night, we went to bed, holding each other, whispering words of love that could be our last. If something happens to me, Henry said, I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets, I love you more than my own life. I cried in silence, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the smell of his skin. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed to mock our situation. Damian arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that chilled my blood. Morning, lovebirds, he called. Melissa appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day. Except this was a wedding with death. During breakfast, which we could barely eat, Damian explained the route. It's a beautiful trail, he said, spreading a map. It leads to a lookout where you can see the whole valley. They say the views are spectacular. His eyes shone with an enthusiasm that seemed demonic. Of course, the views would be spectacular. They would be the last we would see. The trail has some steep parts, Melissa added, as if giving tourist information, but nothing experienced hikers like you can't handle. Her comment about our hiking abilities was a cruel joke. We were two 60-year-olds who barely walked through the park. As we loaded the car, I saw Damian meticulously checking his backpack. Ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. What's that for? I asked, pointing. For safety, he replied without missing a beat. If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal. Of course. They'd send a distress signal after pushing us off a cliff, so our bodies could be found, confirming a tragic accident. Everything was calculated. Every detail planned to make our murders look perfectly natural. The tower car ride to the mountains felt like an eternity. Melissa put on cheerful music, singing along as if we were truly on a fun family outing. Damian drove carefully, obeying every speed limit. He didn't want an accident to ruin his perfect plans. During the trip, Henry discreetly took my hand and activated the recording on his phone. Everything from that moment on would be recorded. If we survived, we'd have proof. If not, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived, my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The place was beautiful, tall trees, the sound of a nearby river. But for me, it had become the setting for my own execution. Damian and Melissa took their backpacks, smiling and joking. Ready for the adventure? Damian asked. And for the first time in 25 years, I saw the same cold glint in his eyes that he'd had the night he killed his brother. The trail started easy, winding through lush trees and moss-covered rocks. Melissa walked ahead, taking pictures, exclaiming at wildflowers and birds. Her performance was perfect. A loving daughter-in-law enjoying a special day. Damian walked behind us, supposedly to make sure we didn't fall behind. But I could feel his eyes on our backs like daggers. Every time I turned, he smiled that grin he'd perfected over 25 years of lies. "How are you doing, Mom and Dad?" he'd ask with fake concern. "Need to stop and rest?" After an hour, we hit a steeper section. My legs felt heavy. Henry was breathing hard. We weren't used to this. Our murderous children knew it. They'd chosen a route to exhaust us, making us vulnerable. "We're almost at the lookout," Melissa announced. But according to the map I'd seen, we still had an hour to go. Her lie confirmed it. They had no intention of reaching the real lookout. The place they planned to kill us must be much closer. During the hike, I tried to memorize every detail, every tree, every rock, a reference point if I survived and needed to explain to the police. Henry was doing the same. We exchanged glances, terror mixed with determination. We were walking toward our deaths, but it was also our only chance to get evidence. "Oh, look at that!" Melissa suddenly shouted, pointing to a rock formation. "That cliff has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there for some special photos?" My blood ran cold. There it was, the place they'd chosen. The cliff rose 90 feet above the main trail, accessible by a secondary path that looked far more dangerous. Loose rocks, fewer trees to grab. From the top, a precipice plunged into a deep gorge full of jagged rocks. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, trying to sound casual. "That trail looks pretty dangerous for people our age." But Damian had already started walking toward the turnoff, his backpack full of safety equipment he wouldn't use to save us. "Come on, Mom," he said, using the voice he'd used as a kid to convince me. "It'll only take a few minutes. Besides, Melissa's right. The photos from up there are going to be spectacular." The way he said spectacular made me tremble. They'd be spectacular for whoever saw them as evidence of our accident. Henry squeezed my hand, reminding me his phone was recording. We had to go on. We had to go all the way to get the evidence. If we refused now, they'd find another opportunity, another place, another excuse. The climb was exhausting. Loose rocks slid under our feet. More than once, I nearly fell. But the most terrifying thing was realizing how perfect this place was for a murder. If someone accidentally tripped and fell, there would be no survival. And no witnesses. Almost there. Melissa shouted from above, where she'd already arrived with the agility of someone who'd planned this route. Damian followed, then helped Henry and me up the last few feet. His hands on my arms felt like vulture claws. The lookout was spectacular. The whole valley, mountains in the distance, the river winding through trees. In any other circumstance, it would have been beautiful. But knowing what I knew, it was the perfect setting for a nightmare. "Come over here for the photos," Melissa shouted, positioning herself near the edge. "I want the valley in the background." Henry and I approached slowly, each step bringing us closer to our final destination. I could see Damian strategically positioning himself behind us, calculating angles, measuring distances. "Perfect," Melissa exclaimed, raising her camera. "Now hug each other and smile." Henry and I hugged, probably for the last time, as she snapped picture after picture. Every flash felt like lightning, announcing the storm. "Take one more," Damian suggested, moving closer. "But this time, stand back a little so the landscape looks better." One step back meant being exactly on the edge of the precipice. Henry and I exchanged a look. The time had come. We moved back as told, feeling solid ground disappear, only the emptiness of the abyss behind us. Melissa raised the camera one more time. But this time, I saw something different in her eyes. No need to pretend. The mask had fallen. "Smile," she said, her voice no longer sweet. "This is going to be your last photo." At that moment, Damian lunged, his arms outstretched. The plan was simple: push us backwards into the void, take photos of the accident, then go down to discover our broken bodies. But Henry had been preparing. In the last second, he grabbed Damian's wrist and pulled him forward. "If we're going to die, you're coming with us," he shouted with a fury I'd never seen. For a moment, all four of us teetered on the edge, holding on to each other in a macabre dance between life and death. Melissa screamed, trying to help Damian, but our combined weight was too much. I felt the ground give way. Felt gravity win. Then, all four of us fell together, locked in a deadly embrace, screaming as the air whistled around us and the rocky ground rushed up. In those seconds that stretched into an eternity, I thought of Richard, of how he must have felt when Damian pushed him 25 years ago. The impact was brutal. I heard the horrible sound of bones cracking, my own body shattering against the rocks. The pain was indescribable, but even more terrible was the taste of blood in my mouth and the certainty that this time Damian had won. This time, there would be no witnesses to tell the truth. But then I heard Henry's voice, weak but clear, "Hilda, don't move. Play dead." And I realized something incredible. I was still alive. The pain was so intense I thought I would go crazy. Every fiber of my body screamed. I felt blood running down my face, something wet and sticky soaking my clothes. But Henry's voice echoed like a divine command, "Play dead." With willpower I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling my breathing until it was imperceptible. A few feet away, I heard the moans of pain from Damian and Melissa. They had also survived, but from their groans, they seemed worse off. "Melissa," I heard my son's broken voice. "Are you okay?" His concern for his wife made my stomach churn. This man, who'd murdered his own brother and tried to kill us, was still capable of love for someone. "I think I broke my leg," Melissa moaned. "It hurts so much, Damian." "And what about the old people?" The disrespectful way she referred to us confirmed it. We had never been family to her. We were just obstacles to our money. I heard movement, like Damian crawling toward us. My heart beat so fast I was afraid he'd hear it. "They're dead," he announced after a few minutes that felt like hours. "Both of them have their eyes open, but they're not breathing." His life filled me with a strange hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe we would have a chance. "Perfect," Melissa whispered with a satisfaction that chilled my blood. "It worked just like we planned." "Well, except the part where we fell too." I heard her bitter laugh. "At least we won't have to pretend we love them anymore." For the next few minutes, that felt like an eternity, Damian and Melissa discussed their situation. Both injured, but mobile. The plan now was to crawl until they found a place to call for help, then tell the story of how they'd miraculously survived a tragic accident that killed their poor grandparents. "Remember the story?" Damian said to Melissa. "We were taking pictures when a rock came loose under Dad's feet. He tripped, and trying to grab on, pulled Mom with him. We tried to help, but we fell too. It's important that our stories match." "I know," Melissa replied. "We've practiced this 100 times. We are the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. Poor us. We lost our dear in-laws in a horrible accident." Her performance was so convincing that if I hadn't lived the truth, I would have believed every word. Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled toward what they hoped would be their salvation. When silence finally fell, Henry whispered my name so low I could barely hear it. "Hilda, are you okay?" I answered in the same whisper, confirming I was alive, but terribly injured. "My left leg is broken," he told me, his voice choked with pain. "And I think I have a few fractured ribs. What about you?" I did a mental inventory. A stabbing pain in my right arm. My head throbbing. Something was definitely wrong with my shoulder. But I was alive. That was more than I had hoped for. "We're bad, but we're alive," I whispered. "But there's no signal down here." That was the most terrifying part. Alive, but trapped, injured, with no way to communicate. If no one came, we would die here slowly. "Henry," I whispered, "before it's too late, I need you to tell me everything. Everything that really happened the night Richard died." My husband sighed deeply, as if he'd been waiting 25 years for this moment. "That night," he began, his voice trembling, "Richard came to find me in the workshop. He was furious. He had papers in his hands, bank statements. He showed me evidence that Damian had been stealing money from our accounts for months, small amounts at first, then larger sums. Richard had been investigating because he had noticed discrepancies in our savings." The physical pain mingled with the emotional pain as I listened. "Richard wanted to confront Damian that same night," Henry continued. I tried to calm him down, to convince him to wait, but he was determined. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his younger brother was stealing from us. "And you followed him?" I asked, though I knew the answer. I followed him because I was afraid of what might happen. I knew Richard's temper when he got angry, and I also knew, well, I had noticed something strange about Damian lately. A coldness that sent shivers down my spine. When I got to the gorge, Henry continued, I found them screaming at each other. Richard had the papers in his hand, waving them in Damian's face. "You're a thief," he was yelling. "You're stealing from our own parents." Damian denied everything. He said Richard was crazy, making things up. My heart raced as I imagined the scene, my two sons facing off in the dark. What happened next? Henry paused for a long time. Richard told him that if he didn't return the money and confess everything to us, he would tell us the truth himself. Damian went berserk. He yelled that Richard had always been the favorite, that he had always had everything easy, that it was time for things to change. And then, Henry's voice broke. Damian pushed Richard. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him with all his strength, deliberately. I saw Richard trying to keep his balance. Saw his arms flailing desperately, looking for something to grab onto. But it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds. "Why did you never tell me the truth?" Henry sighed deeply. Because when I got to where Damian was, he was crying, trembling, telling me over and over that it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you anything, that he couldn't lose you too. "But you knew it was a lie," I murmured from the bottom of my heart. "Yes, but he was my son, Hilda, my only surviving son. How could I turn him over to the police? How could I destroy what was left of our family?" His justification hurt as much as my physical injuries. "And the stolen money?" I continued. "Damian promised me he would return it little by little. He swore it had been a bad decision, that he had been desperate, that it would never happen again, but he never returned a single penny. In fact, he kept stealing, and I kept quiet because every day that passed made me more of an accomplice to his crime." Just then, we heard voices in the distance. Damian and Melissa had managed to find help. Soon, rescue teams would be here, and our murderous children would play the roles of their lives, the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the sound of helicopters. The rescue team had arrived, and with them, the most crucial moment of our lives. Henry and I had to make a decision in minutes. Should we continue to pretend to be dead until we found the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth, or risk being rescued along with our murderers? "Hilda," Henry whispered urgently. "The phone recorded everything that happened up there. We have Melissa's confession about the plan. We have Damian admitting that we are obstacles. We have everything. But if they find us alive now, they can destroy the evidence before we manage to hand it over." He was right. If Damian and Melissa realized we had survived and heard their confessions, they would find a way to silence us forever. This time, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be something much more direct and definitive. We had to wait for the perfect moment. "They're down here," Damian's voice shouted from above. "My parents, please hurry." His performance was perfect, his voice broken with pain and despair. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed he was a son devastated by loss. "Sir, stay calm," an authoritative voice replied. "We're going to come down to evaluate you. You and your wife can move." I heard ropes and equipment being prepared. Melissa had perfected her role as the grieving widow. "I can't believe this happened," she sobbed. We were taking pictures, so happy. It all happened so fast. A rock came loose and they fell. Every word was a stab in my heart because I knew she would repeat those words to the police, to the media, to anyone who'd listen. The rescuers began to descend. I heard their voices getting closer, their boots, the clinking of equipment. Henry discreetly squeezed my hand, reminding me to keep up the act. "They're here," one of the rescuers shouted. "We have 2 people at the bottom of the gorge." He approached, examining us. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow. I felt his hands searching for a pulse, his ear near my mouth. "This one still has a faint pulse," he announced, referring to Henry. "The woman? I'm not sure. I need the medical team down here immediately." My heart raced. The plan was working. They would believe Henry was near death but alive, while I was close enough to death not to be an immediate threat. For the next few minutes, which felt like hours, paramedics worked on us. I felt an oxygen mask, checks on my wounds, being secured to a stretcher. The whole time, I fought against every instinct screaming to open my eyes, ask for help, stop pretending. The man is stable but critical. I heard a paramedic report over the radio. The woman is in very serious condition. Pulse almost imperceptible. We need to transport them to the hospital immediately. Perfect. They would take us to the hospital where we could talk to authorities without Damian and Melissa silencing us. During the ascent, I could hear Melissa's faint sobs and the comforting words the rescuers offered her and Damian. "You were so brave to survive this," someone said. "It's a miracle you're relatively okay." If only they knew the real miracle was that Henry and I were alive to tell the truth. In the medical helicopter, flying toward the hospital, I felt Henry's presence next to me. The paramedics focused on keeping him stable. His injuries were more serious than mine. For a terrible moment, I feared he might die before we could reveal the truth. "Ma'am," I heard a paramedic say, "if you can hear me, hold on. We'll be at the hospital in a few minutes." His voice was gentle, full of genuine compassion, a stark contrast to the falsehoods from my own family. At the hospital, chaos erupted. Doctors and nurses rushed around. I was taken to an emergency room. I had to keep pretending to be unconscious, but I also needed to find a way to communicate. "Doctor," I heard a nurse say, "her vital signs are strange. Her pulse is stronger than we would expect for someone in her supposed condition." My heart skipped a beat. They'd discovered me. I was such a bad actress, my body was betraying me. The doctor murmured. "It happens sometimes in cases of extreme trauma. The body has mysterious ways of clinging to life. Let's keep a close eye on the lady. The next few hours will be crucial. We've done everything we can." Melissa made a sound, supposedly a sob, but to me it was a sigh of relief. "Can we see them?" Damian asked. "Just for a few minutes. We need to say goodbye, just in case." The doctor agreed. Soon, I heard footsteps. This was the most dangerous moment. I had to convince my murderous son I was dying. I felt Damian's presence. His hand touched mine, and it was all I could do not to pull away. "Mom," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened." His words were poisoned honey, sweet but deadly. Melissa approached. "Hilda, dear," she murmured. "You've been like a mother to me. We'll never forget you." Liar. The only reason they wouldn't forget me was because they'd have to live with the knowledge they'd murdered me. But then Damian leaned closer to my ear and whispered something that chilled my blood. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mom. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Richard." In that moment, I knew our plan had worked. Damian had just confessed. Even though I had no way to record it, a nurse in the room had heard every word. Damian's whisper echoed like a direct confession. He mentioned Richard. He admitted some truths should remain buried. And most importantly, he acknowledged our financial questions had been the reason for our accident. But I needed more. I needed a full confession that couldn't be misinterpreted or denied. The nurse, a young woman named Enz, froze next to the monitoring machine. Through my half-closed eyelids, I saw her eyes widen in surprise and horror. She had heard something she shouldn't have, and her expression told me she understood the implications. "What did you say about Richard?" Melissa whispered, obviously surprised by the mention of the dead brother. Damian tensed, realizing he'd said too much. "Nothing," he muttered. "I just meant, well, Mom always wondered what really happened that night. I guess it doesn't matter anymore." But it did matter. And Melissa was smart enough to realize her husband had made a mistake. "Damian," she said in a tense voice, "let's go. The doctors need space to work." I felt the tension between them, the mutual understanding they had said too much in the wrong place. After they left, Nurse Enz approached my bed. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I know you can hear me. What I just heard is not normal. If you're in danger, you need to tell me somehow." Her voice had an urgency that filled me with hope. Someone else had started to suspect. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. The smallest possible movement, but Enz noticed it immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's pretending to be unconscious." I moved my finger again, twice. "Yes, listen," she said, leaning closer. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your monitors. If you are in danger from those people who were just here, move your finger 3 times." Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Enz gasped. "They did this to you?" 3 more movements. The nurse moved away, checking my 4, processing what she'd discovered. I saw her struggling with what to do. Finally, she approached me again. "I'm going to talk to the doctor in charge," she whispered. "But I need you to keep pretending until we can protect you. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. The next few minutes were agonizing. Enz left. I was alone, waiting and praying she would believe me. Finally, I heard footsteps. It was Enz, accompanied by an older man, the chief doctor, and, surprisingly, 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor said in a low voice, "Nurse Enz told me about your situation. If you can hear me, we need you to know that you are safe now. The officers are here to protect you." A wave of relief so intense almost broke my act. "Can you open your eyes?" one officer asked. Slowly, I opened them. The hospital light blinded me, but I gradually focused on the worried faces. "Thank God," Enz murmured. I thought I was going crazy. "Ma'am," said the police officer, "Detective Johnson, we understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain?" My voice came out as a raspy whisper after hours of pretending. My son and his wife pushed us." The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, recordings, and revelations. I told Detective Johnson everything: Richard's death, Damian's thefts, the pressure to change our will, and finally, the plan to murder us. "Your husband has recorded evidence?" the detective asked, his eyes gleaming. "Yes," I replied. "Everything is on his phone. The confessions, the plans, everything." The detective immediately went to Henry's room. Henry had regained consciousness an hour after me, and when the detective explained, he handed over his phone without hesitation. "Here's everything," he said, his voice weak but firm. 25 years of lies and the truth about what happened today. While police technicians analyzed the recording, Damian and Melissa remained in the waiting room, playing their parts as devastated family members to other hospital visitors. They had no idea their careful performance was about to end forever. "The recording is clear," the detective announced an hour later. "We have explicit confessions about Richard's murder, admissions about stealing money, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder against you, too. It's more than enough to arrest them." "But are you going to arrest them here?" I asked, concerned for our safety. The detective nodded. "We already have officers in position. As soon as we have the arrest warrant signed, we'll take them in. In the meantime, you are both under police protection." The irony wasn't lost on me. Damian and Melissa were downstairs, receiving condolences for our deaths, planning our funeral and inheritance. They had no idea that upstairs, in these hospital rooms, we were tearing down their carefully constructed world of lies. "Is there anything else?" the detective asked, pulling out a folder. "After hearing your story, we investigated your son's finances. Not only is he bankrupt, as you suspected, but he also owes money to some very dangerous people, unofficial lenders who don't take excuses." My blood ran cold. "You mean that we weren't just inconvenient to him?" "Precisely," the detective said. "You were his only salvation. With your inheritance, he could pay off his debts and start over. Without you, he would probably be dead in a few weeks." That revelation added a new dimension to the betrayal. He hadn't just seen us as obstacles, he had seen us as his financial lifeline. Our death wasn't just convenient. It was absolutely necessary for his survival. "And what will happen to our grandchildren?" I asked, feeling a new wave of pain. "Social services will take temporary custody of them," the detective replied gently. "But as I understand it, you could apply for custody once you recover from your injuries." The idea of raising the children of our own murderers was overwhelming. But it was also the only way to ensure something good would come out of this nightmare. Those children were innocent, and they deserved a chance to grow up in a home where love was real, not feigned. "It's time," the detective announced when an officer entered with papers. "The warrants are signed. We're going to arrest them now." Through the window of my room, overlooking the hospital parking lot, I saw police officers discreetly positioning themselves. The moment I had been waiting for 25 years had finally arrived. Damian Black and Melissa Black, I heard the firm voice of the officer in charge. "You are under arrest for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Hilda and Henry Black." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Melissa's hysterical voice. "What are you talking about? We are the victims here. Our in-laws died in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "your in-laws are alive, and they have provided complete evidence of your crimes." There was a moment of absolute silence, followed by a scream of desperation from Damian. "That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead." His involuntary confession was captured by police recorders, adding another piece of evidence. Through the radio, I heard Melissa begin to blame Damian. "It was all his idea. I didn't want to do any of this. He forced me." And Damian, in desperation, screamed, "You are the one who suggested the cliff. You planned all of this." In minutes, the alliance that had lasted for years fell apart as each one tried to save their own skin. Detective Johnson returned to my room an hour later, an expression of satisfaction mixed with sadness. "They're arrested and on their way to the station," he informed me. "They're both trying to blame each other, which only strengthens our case. But there's something else I need to tell you." "What else?" I asked, though I wasn't sure my heart could handle any more revelations. "During the arrest, we found this in your son's backpack," he said, showing me a small digital recorder. "Apparently, he had been recording his conversations with you and your husband for the past few weeks, probably looking for evidence that you suspected something." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" The detective sighed. "It means he knew you were starting to discover the truth. The trip to the mountain wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a direct response to your suspicions." In one of the recordings, you can clearly hear Melissa telling him, "We have to act fast before they go to the police." The depth of the planning, the coldness of the calculation, took my breath away. They hadn't just planned to kill us. They had been monitoring our conversations, evaluating the level of danger we posed. We were mice in a maze, and they had been the scientists observing our every move. "There's something else," the detective continued, "that we found in the investigation of his finances. Your son not only owed money to dangerous lenders, but he had also forged your signature on several documents trying to access your bank accounts. If you had died on that mountain, he would have had immediate access to all your resources." Every new revelation was like another stab. My own son had not only planned to murder me, he had been actively stealing from me, forging my signature, violating every principle of family trust one had tried to instill in him. "How much money did he steal in total?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "About $50,000 over the last 5 years, the detective replied. "Small amounts that he thought you wouldn't notice, but which, when added up, amount to a significant sum. The money Henry and I had saved over decades of hard work, penny by penny, had been financing our son's life of luxury while he planned our murder." The following days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, lawyer visits, and calls from news media that had picked up the story. The local press titled the case, "The Most Horrible Family Betrayal of the Decade." My sister Harriet arrived crying, hugging me as if she hadn't seen me in decades. "Hilda," she said, "I always knew there was something strange about Damian after Richard's death, but I never imagined he was capable of this." Her words comforted me, confirming my maternal instincts hadn't been completely blind. "And the kids?" I asked about my grandchildren, now in temporary custody. "I saw them yesterday," Harriet replied sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents can't come home. They're too young to understand." Our lawyer, Albert, came with news. "The case is solid," he assured us. With the recordings, the confessions during the arrest, and all the financial evidence, it's almost impossible for them to escape significant convictions. But then he added, however, they are trying to negotiate a lesser guilty plea by claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated. "A crime of passion?" I exclaimed indignantly. "They planned this for weeks, bought special equipment, chose the perfect place." Albert nodded gravely. I know, and we have evidence of premeditation, but their lawyers are going to argue it was a desperate decision made under extreme financial pressure. The idea that they could receive reduced sentences filled me with fury. They had murdered Richard. They had tried to murder us. They had stolen our money for years. And now they wanted to present themselves as victims of circumstance. What can we do to ensure they get what they deserve? I asked. Testify, Albert replied simply. Your testimony combined with all the evidence will be crucial for the jury to understand the true nature of these crimes. But I warn you, it's going to be emotionally devastating to face your son in court. He was right. The idea of looking Damian in the eyes, of listening to his lawyers. Try to justify the unjustifiable, of publicly reliving every moment of this nightmare was overwhelming. But it was what I had to do. For Richard, for us, and for my grandchildren who deserve to know the truth. 3 weeks after the arrest, Henry and I were finally able to go home. Our wounds had healed enough, though he still needed crutches, and I had my arm in a sling. The house felt strange, like the set of a play after all the actors had left. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Breakfast dishes in the sink, the bed unmade, the flowers Damian had brought me withered and dead on the kitchen table. It was as if time had stopped the moment our normal lives ended forever. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? I asked Henry that first night back, in our familiar bed. He hugged me with his uninjured arm and sighed deeply. I don't know, Hilda, he said. But we're alive. We have the truth on our side. And for the first time in 25 years, we don't have to live with secrets. The trial began 6 months later. On the day I had to testify, I looked Damian directly in the eyes for the first time since the arrest. I saw no remorse, no pain. I didn't see the son I had raised. I saw a cold and calculating stranger who had disguised himself as my son for decades. When I finished my testimony, after recounting every horrible detail of our experience, I addressed him directly from the witness stand. Damian, I don't know who you are, but you are no longer my son. My son died the night you killed Richard, and what has been living in his place for 25 years is a monster that I unwittingly helped raise. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Damian guilty of first-degree murder for Richard's death and first-degree attempted murder for what he did to us. Melissa received the same conviction as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, 1 year later, Henry and I have begun the process of formally adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful, innocent children who deserve a chance to grow up knowing what true love is, not the manipulative and toxic love they received from their biological parents. Every night when I tuck them in, I tell them about their Uncle Richard, the brother they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dream of being an uncle. Our lives will never be perfect again, but we are building something real, something rooted in truth and unconditional love. And that, after everything, is a future worth fighting for.